They refused to speak to anyone, not their parents, not their teachers, not even the doctors who tried everything to break through, only to each other. They had their own language, their own rhythm, their own world. They were inseparable, unreachable, unfathomable, until one of them died, suddenly, mysteriously, without warning. And the other, she simply said, "I'm free at last. Jennifer has given up her life for me." What kind of bond ends in a death like that? This is the story of June and Jennifer Gibbons, the silent twins. And what you're about to hear is not fiction. It happened, and it may just be one of the most disturbing, fascinating, and heartbreaking psychological mysteries of the 20th century. They were born in Barbados on April 11, 1963, identical twins. June came first. Jennifer followed. Healthy, quiet, perfectly normal. At first, their parents, Gloria and Aubrey Gibbons, moved to the UK shortly after the twins were born. They settled in Haverfordwest, Wales, a small, quiet town where the Gibbons were the only black family for miles. That's where the silence began. At first, it was just a shy reluctance to speak in school. But soon, it became something deeper. A wall. They weren't just shy, they were impenetrable. They spoke only to each other, and only in a language no one could understand. A rapid-fire stream of sounds that sounded like English, but wasn't. It was a blend of Barbadian Creole, sped up to an unintelligible blur. It was their secret code, and in time, even their family couldn't understand them. School authorities were baffled. How could two girls with no medical issues, no physical impairments, be so unreachable? They were placed in special education programs. Doctors were brought in, speech therapists, psychiatrists, but the girls wouldn't speak, not to anyone, except each other. At home, their behavior was just as strange. They moved in perfect synchrony. If one twin lifted a spoon, the other followed. If one stood up, the other did too within seconds. As if they were mirrors. They weren't just close, they were fused. Their younger sister, Greta, would later say, "It was like they lived in a bubble. You couldn't get in, and they couldn't get out." Even their parents started to fear what was happening. Gloria once described how she'd watch the girls from across the room, completely silent, staring at each other without blinking, for minutes at a time. No words, no smiles, just intensity. It wasn't just eerie, it was unnatural. And yet, when left alone in their room, they would speak fluently, laugh, argue, perform plays and recite poems they'd written. By their early teens, the girls had filled notebooks with stories. Vivid, elaborate tales of love, revenge, betrayal, and death. Their stories weren't sweet fairy tales. They were dark, twisted. Jennifer, in particular, wrote about characters being possessed, being killed, or suffering tragic fates. In one story, a girl murders her twin to escape her shadow. It was unsettling, but it was also the only window into their minds, because in the real world, they remained mute, impassive, untouchable. Doctors decided something had to change. At age 14, the twins were sent to separate boarding schools in a desperate attempt to break their codependency. What happened next only deepened the mystery. Without Jennifer, June became catatonic. She didn't eat, didn't speak, didn't move. Jennifer, alone in her own school, did the same. It was as if the girls had been unplugged. Their personalities, their very will to live, were only activated by each other's presence. Eventually, the experiment was abandoned. The twins were reunited, and they went right back to their silent, synchronized world. Only now, something had changed. Their bond, once playful, had grown darker. As they approached adulthood, their isolation deepened. By age 17, they barely interacted with anyone outside of their bedroom. Their journals revealed growing resentment toward their parents, society, and even each other. In her diary, June wrote, "We're both holding each other back. There is a murderous gleam in her eye. Dear Lord, I am scared of her. She is not normal. Jennifer, in her own journal, wrote, "We have become fatal enemies in each other's eyes. I say to myself, can I get rid of my own shadow? They didn't just love each other. They were obsessed, trapped, and perhaps plotting." At 18, things took a strange turn. The girls began spending time with a pair of American boys who had moved into the neighborhood. It was their first real social interaction outside the family, and it ended in chaos. When the boys rejected them, the twins spiraled into rage. They stopped writing love stories. Instead, they wrote about fire. Then they lit them. Over the next year, the twins set multiple fires: a tractor store, community hall, an abandoned school. They were caught. They didn't resist. They barely spoke. They just stared at each other. The court deemed them mentally unfit for prison. Instead, they were sent to Broadmoor Hospital, one of the most secure psychiatric facilities in the UK, a place that had housed murderers, arsonists, and criminals far more dangerous than two silent girls. But Broadmoor would become the crucible that changed everything. It was inside those cold walls that the twins' bond would twist into something no one could have predicted, something that would end in tragedy and liberation. Broadmoor Hospital. The name alone carries a weight, a place associated with Britain's most dangerous minds: serial killers, psychopaths, the criminally insane. And in 1982, two silent teenage girls walked through its gates. June and Jennifer Gibbons weren't violent killers. They weren't hardened criminals. They had set fires, yes, but they weren't even aggressive when arrested. Yet the court ruled them a threat, not to others but to themselves. And so began their next chapter, 11 years in Broadmoor. And what happened behind those walls is almost too strange to believe. They were immediately separated, each placed in different wards, different routines, different therapists. It was supposed to break their dependency, to finally get them talking, cooperating, opening up. But that didn't happen. June refused to speak. She shut down, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks. Jennifer became even more unpredictable. She whispered to herself, would stare at mirrors for hours. Once, she tried to strangle herself with her bedsheet. Doctors realized quickly, these weren't just two troubled girls. They were in a psychic war with each other, a kind of invisible tug of war for control. In therapy, they gave just enough to cause confusion. They would sometimes speak a word or two, but never consistently, and never with full trust. It was their diaries, hundreds of pages filled during their confinement, that began to reveal the truth. June wrote, "She's a dangerous person, evil. I'm terrified of her. If I turn my back, I think she'd kill me." Jennifer wrote, "She's possessed by the devil. She steals my thoughts. I want to get rid of her. She must die." They were sisters, twins, each other's only real companion. But they had come to believe that the only way one could live was if the other died. Broadmoor staff tried every strategy: separate them, reunite them, force communication, encourage creativity. Nothing stuck. When they were apart, they'd grow listless, unresponsive, sometimes even physically ill. Their blood pressure would drop. Their energy would drain. But when reunited, the tension was immediate. One would pace, the other would follow. One would write obsessively, the other would tear up her own pages. The staff at Broadmoor didn't know what to make of it. Some doctors believed Jennifer was the dominant one, intense, manipulative, controlling. Others believed June was playing the victim, shaping the narrative through her writing while letting Jennifer take the blame. But regardless of who was in control, one thing was becoming clear: this was a psychological cage match, and only one of them would make it out. As the years passed, their writings grew darker, more desperate. Jennifer wrote often about death, Not just metaphorical death, but her own. "I have to die," she wrote. "We've decided. That's the only way this will end." She believed she had become the curse, that as long as she was alive, June would never be free. June, for her part, began to change too. She started writing about hope, about escape, about a life outside the walls. The imbalance between them was now visible. Jennifer was deteriorating, while June was waiting. Then came the media. Journalists had gotten wind of the silent twins. One in particular, Marjorie Wallace, a journalist and mental health advocate, was granted access to visit them. She developed a strange, careful relationship with both girls, and what she found was heartbreaking. They were not unintelligent. Far from it. They were brilliant writers, deep thinkers, complicated souls trapped inside the walls of silence, but also possibly trapped in a mutual suicide pact. In one of her final interviews before what happened next, Jennifer told Marjorie, "I'm going to die soon." She said it casually, as if discussing the weather. When asked why, she replied, "We've decided. One of us has to die, and I'm the chosen one." No one took it seriously. After all, Jennifer had made strange declarations before, but this time was different. In early 1993, the hospital began planning to transfer the twins to a less secure facility in Wales called Caswell Clinic. The girls were calmer, more cooperative. On the outside, it looked like progress, but behind the scenes, something was stirring. Jennifer began giving away her belongings, her favorite books, her hairbrush. She even wrote short farewell notes to nurses. Still, no one thought it meant anything more than nervous energy. After all, they were about to be free. March 9, 1993, the day of the transfer. The twins rode together in a secure transport van, accompanied by staff. They barely spoke. Jennifer, usually alert and sharp-eyed, leaned against June's shoulder. She whispered, "At long last, we're out." When they arrived at Caswell Clinic, Jennifer didn't move. She was unconscious. Paramedics were called, rushed her to the hospital. By the time she arrived, she was dead. The cause? Acute myocarditis, a rare and sudden inflammation of the heart. No toxins, no trauma, no drugs, just silence and death. When June was told that Jennifer had died, her response left the nurses frozen. She said, "I'm free at last, liberated. And at last, Jennifer has given up her life for me." It wasn't grief, it was relief. And in the days that followed, June, the once silent twin, began speaking, conversing, smiling, as if a spell had been broken. Jennifer was gone, and June, the twin who had barely uttered a word for over 2 decades, was suddenly talking. It was as if someone had flipped a switch. She spoke clearly, confidently, even casually. Doctors were stunned. Nurses were stunned. The girl who once hid behind her sister's silence was now reading, writing, even laughing. And she said it herself. "I'm free. I'm free at last. And Jennifer has given up her life for me." Outside the hospital walls, news of Jennifer's sudden death spread quickly. The story of the silent twins, long a curiosity in psychology circles, was now front-page material. Newspapers, magazines, even television networks across the UK and the US picked up the headline. "Twin dies hours after hospital transfer. Surviving sister speaks." People wanted to know, was it murder? A suicide pact? Was Jennifer's death natural? Or something more sinister? And above all, what had happened in that van? What passed between them in that final moment? The silence only deepened the mystery. Investigators reviewed the timeline. Jennifer had no history of heart problems. Her physicals showed no issues. And yet, her heart gave out just like that. The autopsy confirmed acute myocarditis. Sudden, rare, unexplained. But it was what came before that left a lasting chill. Jennifer had been saying goodbye. She gave away her possessions. She hugged her favorite nurse tightly the night before. She told staff plainly, "I'm going to die soon." And the morning of the transfer, she leaned her head on her sister's shoulder and whispered, "At long last, we're out." It was not coincidence. It was a goodbye. And June, she didn't mourn the way people expected her to. There were no tears, no panic, just a strange calmness, almost like she already knew. In her new journal, June wrote, "I feel peace now. There's no more struggle, no more shadow. I miss her, but I am finally alive." In the months after Jennifer's death, June was slowly reintegrated into society. She was moved out of psychiatric care and into assisted living. She joined a writing group. She began volunteering at local programs. She even granted a few interviews. For the first time, the world saw her as an individual, not the quieter half, not the other twin, just June. And what she shared in those rare interviews revealed just how complicated their relationship had been. She said that they loved each other deeply, but they were also trapped. Each was like a shadow the other couldn't escape. "We couldn't live without each other," she said once. "But we couldn't live with each other either." There had been jealousy, resentment, even fear. June admitted she sometimes wished Jennifer would disappear. Jennifer admitted she sometimes feared what June might do to her. And yet, they never separated. Not really, until one of them made the final move. The public became obsessed. Books were published. Talk shows dissected the case. And documentaries tried to make sense of what had happened. But the most comprehensive account came from Marjorie Wallace, the journalist who had visited them during their time at Broadmoor. Her book, The Silent Twins, was released to critical acclaim. It included diary excerpts, personal notes, interviews, and her own emotional reflections after Jennifer's death. The public devoured the story, but they weren't just drawn to the mystery. They were haunted by one question: could a bond really be so strong that one person would die for the other? Psychologists offered theories. Some believed the twins had experienced folie à deux, a shared delusional disorder, where one person's madness feeds the others until they become indistinguishable. Others pointed to cryptophagia, the private language often found between twins, only this time taken to a terrifying extreme. And some believed Jennifer had died from psychological resignation, a kind of mental surrender that physically shuts down the body. But no theory felt complete, because this wasn't a clear-cut case. This was a love story, a rivalry, a psychological mystery, all wrapped into one. Years passed. June stayed mostly out of the public eye. She continued writing, privately, quietly, sometimes for herself, sometimes for mental health charities. She never published a memoir, never appeared on reality TV, never tried to profit from the past. When asked if she'd ever felt peace, she said, "Sometimes, when I'm writing, or when I'm alone in nature." But she also admitted, "I still feel her with me. Sometimes I even hear her voice. But now it doesn't scare me." Jennifer Gibbons was buried at St. Martin's Cemetery in Haverfordwest. Her gravestone reads, Jennifer Lorraine Gibbons, April 11th, 1963 to March 9th, 1993. We once were two, we two made one. We no more two. Through life be one. Rest in peace. What remains today is more than just a bizarre news story. It's a case study in identity, codependency, and sacrifice. A haunting reminder that even the closest bonds can sometimes be the hardest to break. The story of the Silent Twins didn't end with Jennifer's death. If anything, it was only the beginning of something larger, a deeper conversation about identity, about mental health, about the limits and the dangers of love without boundaries. Because the world didn't forget. If anything, the world became obsessed. Marjorie Wallace, the journalist who befriended the twins during their time at Broadmoor, continued her work after Jennifer's passing. Her book, The Silent Twins, offered the most in-depth look into their minds through diary excerpts, interviews, and personal reflections. And it changed the public perception of June and Jennifer forever. People had once viewed them as oddities. Tabloids had called them creepy, possessed, haunted. But now, people began to understand them as what they truly were. Two deeply intelligent, creative, and emotionally isolated young women, failed by a system that never knew what to do with them. Their story sparked documentaries, stage plays, psychological case studies, even art exhibits inspired by their codependency, their silence, their tragedy. And more importantly, their story forced a re-examination of institutional mental health care in Britain. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Two teenage girls were imprisoned in one of the most secure hospitals in the UK for years, for crimes that didn't physically hurt anyone. Arson is serious, yes, but was it worth 11 years of high-security psychiatric confinement? Many believe the system simply didn't know what to do with them, so it locked them away. Psychologists and mental health experts have studied the twins' case ever since. And while theories abound, no one can agree on what truly happened. Some believe it was a classic case of folie à deux, a shared psychosis between two people so closely bonded they couldn't separate fantasy from reality. Others believe it was identity diffusion, a phenomenon where twins develop as one personality rather than two. And still others suggest Jennifer may have been under the control of June, or the other way around. But there's another theory, one that's harder to prove and more unsettling to accept, that Jennifer willed herself to die. In the months before her death, her behavior became increasingly symbolic. She gave away her belongings. She withdrew from her routines. She spoke openly of death, not in despair, but with resolution. Some believe she'd accepted her fate as the twin who had to die, a role she embraced to finally set June free. And when the moment came, her body simply obeyed. No physical trauma, no drugs, just surrender. But the most haunting part? How well it worked. Because after Jennifer's death, June flourished. She began to live a quiet life in West Wales, writing, volunteering, reading. She stayed out of the spotlight, giving only a handful of interviews over the years. When asked about her sister's death, she doesn't speak in pain. She speaks in peace. "She set me free," she once said. "We were two halves of a whole, but I got to be the half that stayed." Today, June Gibbons is in her 60s. She lives quietly, surrounded by family, far from the psychiatric wards that once held her. She still writes, still reflects, still remembers, but she no longer lives in her sister's shadow. Or perhaps she does, because the truth is, the silence never fully left her. Not really. There are moments, she admits, when she still hears Jennifer's voice, in her sleep, in her writing, in the wind. But now, it no longer frightens her. So what do we make of this story? Was it a tragic case of mental illness? A failure of the system? A psychological mystery that no expert has fully unraveled? Or was it something more? Something spiritual? Something born of the idea that when two souls are too tightly bound, only death can set one of them free? We may never know the full truth behind June and Jennifer Gibbons, because the final pages of their story were written in silence, and that silence still echoes